Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Mamahood After Trauma podcast. I am your host, Emily Cleghorn. This podcast is for mamas navigating childhood trauma while also walking through mamahood at the same time. Together, we will empower each other to connect with who we were created to be versus who we were told to be in our trauma. I am so excited that you have decided to include me on your journey. And today on the podcast, I am so excited to welcome Victoria Craig to join me. And we are talking about how it's okay to breathe. Welcome, Victoria.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so good to be here.
Yeah, so let's begin by giving our listeners a little bit of insight into who you are and how you got to be where you're at today.
Of course, I always go like, how do I get my story into like a nutshell? Because there's quite a lot to it. But firstly, let me just tell you like who I am and what I do. So obviously, as you know, my name is Victoria, and I am a feminine embodiment, empowerment, and self-love coach, and a conscious, connected breathwork facilitator for emotional and trauma release. And ultimately, what I do working with women is through feminine body wisdom, nervous system regulation, subconscious reprogramming, and somatic embodiment practices. I take you on a journey of sacred self-love and deep healing to help you tap into your feminine gifts and awaken more passion, more pleasure, more purpose in your life. And ultimately, what I say I do is I help women come home to their body. You know, we have so much power, gifts and magic within our feminine body, but in a in a patriarchal society, we have really disconnected from that. There's a lot of burnout with women. There's a lot of hustle mode, and especially with with mothers as well. There's like unrealistic expectations on mums to be everything for everyone, to play all of the roles, to have to bring the kids up, to keep the house clean, to cook dinner, to make sure everyone's fed, to look after the partner, and to then have a full-time career often. And all of this tends to just disconnect us from our body, and we're showing up in the world in a way that we've been conditioned to, or we've been told to. And what I do is a lot of breaking down that conditioning and programming, which does involve going into, looking at past experiences and trauma. Trauma is held in the body. Trauma lives in our body, in our tissues, and it can dysregulate us, dysregulate our nervous system, disconnect us from our body, leave us feeling unsafe in our body and unsafe in the world. And it is ultimately blocking us from creating the life that we want to lead, because a lot of the time we have these old patterns playing out that come from our subconscious, our unconscious mind, based on past pain, past shame, past trauma. So it's really that, and how I came into this, I could say my purpose, stepped into my purpose, is from moving through my own pain, trauma, and illness. I actually share it in my story on my website, and I say I've walked through the fire more times than most. I've had multiple challenges and difficult experiences in my life, including losing my mother very, very suddenly whilst being in an abusive relationship, leaving that abusive relationship, finding out I was pregnant 2 days later, and going through a termination. And that was all in the period of 6 weeks. Something that hugely affected me, my life, and my body. It was something I don't have children, I do want children. And it was one of the most challenging decisions I ever had to make. But in society, it's like, well, you made that choice, you just be okay. Just be positive, get on with your life. Further down the line, I suffered with severe autoimmune disorder or disorders and illness. I had alopecia, I lost 3/4 of my hair, I had severe gastrointestinal issues, chronic fatigue, adrenal fatigue, migraines, pelvic inflammatory disease, a bowel prolapse. The list goes on. And then I also uncovered some repressed sexual trauma. So there's been a lot for me to move through, but ultimately what I did is turn my pain into purpose, which really helped me to understand the things that I've been through, and that I am meant to help other women in this space, help other women reclaim their power and come home to their body. And that's what I've done. I've come home to my body. I've unpeeled these layers of conditioning. I've healed and released and moved through trauma. And, when I say, I'm in this space now where I just have this beautiful relationship with myself. Place of, I love myself and I love my body. I've been through eating disorders, body dysmorphia. I used to compete in the bikini and fitness competition. So I've moved through and healed a lot. And it's not to say my life is perfect. There's downs. Life can be a roller coaster at times, but when we build this self-love, when we learn to regulate, when we come home to our body, we're able to move through the challenges in such an easier way than, I look at the difference in me now and how I move through things, triggers, challenges, pain, in comparison to how I did a few years ago. And it's completely different, because I'm able to come back to, I love myself and I matter and I'm worthy. And that's such a beautiful thing. And that's what I want all women to be able to do, and start putting, we get to choose ourselves and we get to put ourselves first, rather than always putting other people ahead of ourselves. Now, I know it's a very different balance when you have children, and I work with a lot of women that are mothers, and what they have been able to do is find that balance where they get to carve out time for themselves. They get to nourish themselves, they get to put themselves first, they get to work with the cycles of their body, and it has a ripple effect on how they show up as a mother. It has a ripple effect on children, because as we heal and we break patterns, and we heal for the generations after us as well.
Yes. I love how you say you've been able to come home to your body. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that when you're born, you are born wholly, authentically you. And then as you go through your childhood and you begin to be influenced by outside forces, you adapt to what you perceive is acceptable or okay. And you disconnect from that wholly authentic version of who you were created to be. And that creates a lot of friction. It creates a lot of friction and disease and all kinds of problems that you come up against.
Yeah, and ultimately this is it from, especially from the ages of 0 to 7, this is when we build our model of the world. This is when our bodies and our brains are developing. So everything that we absorb from the world around us, be it from our parents or caretakers, be it from the media, from peers, from teachers, this is where we really get our beliefs rooted in us. This is where we learn to be who we are in this life. And it, again, like you say, it's not necessarily come from a place of who do we want to be and who are we. I like to say at a soul level, who are we authentically? And when we go into this work, and the healing work, the inner work, the reclamation, it's awareness is such a big piece. We get to start questioning. We get to start questioning some of the things we've been told, some of the, especially with women, how we often show up in the world. It's when we start to ask questions, is this true or is it not true? Is it true for me? That can make a huge a huge shift just in that awareness piece of, well, actually, who am I? Who do I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I feel you. I feel you with that.
So, what were some of the tools that you found particularly helpful in coming home to your body?
Okay, so there's so many, and honestly, over my journey, I mean, I've traveled. I live in Mexico now. I spent a lot of time in India as well, and I saw every healer, coach, shaman, like you name it. I've tried everything, but ultimately, it there's so many modalities and practices out there, but it starts with creating safety in the body and regulating the nervous system. When our nervous system is dysregulated, we're ultimately not feeling safe in our body. That fight and flight, that sympathetic part of the nervous system is activated. And we need that, but we don't want that to be activated all of the time, because ultimately what's happening is then adrenaline and cortisol are flooding the body, and that causes inflammation and dysregulation. So it's, how do we come back to being in our body, feeling safe in our body, and in a place of regulation, which is, how do I connect back to, okay, I'm safe, like that I can breathe again. So breath work is a huge has been a game changer for me and a lot of women that I work with. And now this isn't, I'll dive into the conscious connected breath work in a moment for emotional and trauma release, but just being able to connect with our breath, like a really simple breathing exercise that you can do is just slow, deep breathing. When you find yourself feeling dysregulated, that could be, you know, your mind's really busy, you're crazy, to slow down, you're struggling to sit still, you're struggling to get your thoughts together, you're feeling maybe stressed or feeling anxious. When we're breathing, if we're breathing high up in the chest, I look like I've got no clothes on. I promise you I have it. When we breathe high up in the chest here, so our breath is shallow and fast, then our sympathetic nervous system is activated. There's receptors in the upper parts of our lungs that are linked to that fight and flight part of the nervous system. So if we simply start to breathe deeper, so breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, feel your belly expand, your rib cage expands, that's as your diaphragm is expanding, and then exhale out through the mouth. That is going to activate that parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which is the, I can rest, I can relax, I can breathe again, I'm safe to slow down. So simple deep breathing is a really, really powerful tool, which we forget. And it's just a matter of checking in with your breath.
And I think if you're someone like me, for example, who experienced trauma really early on in your life, like toddler, infant, and you've been in, your nervous system has been on high alert, waiting for the other shoe to drop for like a serious extended amount of time, it takes some practice learning how to breathe deeply. And it's okay. You're not broken. It's okay. It takes time.
And this is something I always say, because I hear people saying like, oh, I need to do this, I need to change this, like, oh, I'm messed up in this, you know, and it's like, no one is broken, no one needs to be fixed. You are whole and worthy already. This is a matter of coming back to that and a remembrance of that you are whole and worthy. If you have been in that state of dysregulation for a very long time, it's having patience in this process. And one of the biggest things that we can do is be compassionate with ourselves. If we're used to being dysregulated, our body's going to keep trying to go back to that. So it's like allowing that, okay, what are these, and this is where I think when we've had you know, experienced trauma, and especially like childhood trauma, it's how can I make this easy? How can I make this as simple as possible. And I'm not saying the simplicity, it means it's going to be easy, but it's like, what are little tools and practices? Because often people think I need to be like diving deep into the work. I need to be spending this much time, hours a day, doing this, doing that. And it's like, realistically, does that work for you? Is your body going to allow you to do that yet as well? So it's like these little practices like breath, we can use that to activate. And I always look at how can we slow down? So yoga is a big one for me. I'm a yoga teacher, and I bring yoga into my yoga and kind of somatic practices into my coaching containers and the work that I do, and really with myself. It's like, because, and I don't mean like your power yoga, where it's like I'm going for a workout. It's more like slower restorative yoga and stretching. Ultimately, it's like, so we can start to slow down in the body, yoga, and we can start to breathe. Often you'll find we're told to meditate. Go and sit and meditate. Well, if you're really dysregulated, it's potentially going to dysregulate you even more, because being told to sit still when your mind is already, are playing tricks on you, and you've got this monkey mind going on, it's not going to slow down. So it's like, okay, maybe if I add some movement into this, maybe if I add some movement in and connect with my breath. So when the monkey mind, it's like, just breathe in through the nose, out through the mouth, or in and out the nose, and let my body move. Or what do I feel in my body? Because a big thing coming back to the body is starting to reconnect with emotion, feeling, and sensation. So it's like, where do I feel tension? Oh, does this area need stretching? And as I breathe through that, so I think it really helps us when we have a focal point, because our mind wants to play tricks on us. So movement is a big game changer for me, and that doesn't have to be yoga. Dancing, right? So if we're dancing, we're and not dancing of like, how do I need to look good? It's just dancing to be in my body. That can be slow dancing, that can be intuitive, that can be, shaking and going kind of a little bit crazy and wild, because what it's going to do is moving energy. It's moving stagnant energy through the body, and it's reconnecting you with your body. And dancing's uplifting, right? Singing actually activates our vagus nerve. Our vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body, from the crown of the head. I believe it comes down to the pubic bone. And when we activate our vagus nerve, it sends a message to the brain to say we're safe. We're safe to relax. We're safe to be in our body. So we get to use these little practices, and it gets to be really, really fun too. Because often people think this, going into like the deeper work, going into the healing, going into the trauma, it's really challenging. And I'll be honest, it can be very activating and very triggering. But let's find that balance where we get to add in the joy, the play, the pleasure. When we've experienced trauma, joy, pleasure, and play has often been removed from our life. So how do we let a little bit more of that in? Things that can help us come back into our body is when we open our creativity. So is that singing, is that dancing, is that artwork, drawing. Everyone's got different things that they connect with. Again, these are little things that can help us come back and build that safety and come back into our body. And then the piece, which is the much deeper work, is for me, there's a conscious connected breath work journeys. And these are truly transformational. It's so it's not like your breath work like at yoga, pranayama that you might have heard with, or just like the breath work technique I was just talking about. This is a breath work technique or a journey that you could be on for could be around 90 minutes. And what we're doing is we're using the breath in a way that allows us to change our state of consciousness. So we're building up the oxygen levels in the body in a way that feels safe for the body and safe for the nervous system. So the technique I use is parasympathetic driven, taking us into a healing state. And what happens after a period of time is you shift this state of consciousness. Now, when I say a state of consciousness, what happens is we're bypassing our conscious and thinking mind, and our critical physical mind, and we're opening up our subconscious mind. We're able to access the subconscious mind where our patterns, our beliefs, our behaviors, our long-term memory and experiences that can be wounds and traumas are stored, our emotional body, where we store emotion, we store trauma in the body, in the tissues, which can often manifest in physical ailments, issues, and disease. We open up the pain body and the limbic brain, which is the feeling part of the brain. And I like to explain it as I've got a very deep journey with plant medicine as well myself, and they can be similar to plant medicine journeys, but without having to take anything and without the psychedelic effect. So we're able to bring these unmet parts, these unhealed parts, these unprocessed and felt emotions and traumas to our awareness to be able to somatically move through them and release them from the body. And these, when I talk about the kind of the wounding and the trauma, it's not just that. We get to tap into the power, the wisdom, and the gifts that we hold inside. We have so much wisdom within our body. Obviously, we have all of the answers inside. And that's why it's coming home to our body, coming back to our intuition.
Unlocking those bits of authenticity that you locked away when you were a child because they were quote unquote unacceptable.
Yeah, exactly. And we bring all of these pieces to awareness to be able to meet them, to process them, to release the bits that aren't serving us. Like I say, we can somatically move the wounds, the traumas, the emotions out of the body that we've been maybe suppressing and holding on to. And that could be through movement. You might find your body moving in any way. You might find yourself shaking. Shaking's a really powerful technique. In the breath work, your body leads, so you just go with whatever your body wants to do. But even day to day, just shaking like a dog or an animal, if you watch them get into confrontation or maybe a fight, something happens, the first thing they do is they shake afterwards, because they shake that energy. They're getting rid of those, the fight and flight hormones through the body. They're getting that energy rid of, and they're resetting their nervous system. So that's something that can come up in these breathwork journeys, is maybe shaking. Your body can move in any way, through sound. So that can be through the breath. Obviously, we make sound through the breath often as well, or you might find yourself making noise. I've had some quite powerful anger releases in breath work, where I've just actually been like making noise into like a pillow, like letting a roar out, moving through some of this anger that had been stored in my body. These are such beautiful journeys, and they just take us into the deeper work. So I think there's a balance here. We want the tools and techniques that are going to help us on a day-to-day basis.
Yes.
But ultimately, to make the long-term shifts and the transformation, we want to be able to go in to have these deeper practices that are going to help us to do the releasing and the deep healing. I also incorporate, when I work with women, inner child work, inner child healing and reparenting, self-intimacy and self-soothing practices, shadow work, so meeting these parts of ourselves that maybe we've repressed and denied and shamed, and integrating them, rather than pushing them away, understanding why they're here. We work with emotional intimacy. Okay, my emotions are actually a roadmap for me. Rather than suppressing them or disassociating or disconnecting, how do I build a relationship with them? An emotion, let's say, for example, we're triggered, the emotion should actually be able to move through the body very quickly if we allow ourselves to feel them. It's suppress them, they get stuck in the body. And when I say stuck, it's like this feeling of, it's like I'm in this low vibration, it might be frustration, it might be fear, anxiety, and it's almost just lingering, because I'm not actually allowing myself to fully go in and meet that emotion. So when we're able to understand our emotions and have practices to connect with them and release them, that's something that day to day makes a huge difference. And then another piece, is a big one, is connecting with the natural cycles of our body. For women,
Mm-hmm.
we go through 4 seasons in a month.
Mm-hmm.
And most where we have, again, the conditioning, the programming, being in a patriarchy, we're showing up as if we are small men. Men have a body, have a day and night body clock. That's not the same for women. We have the 4 different phases of our cycle, our energy and our hormones change
Mm-hmm.
through. So the way we show up, the way we nourish ourselves, the way we put ourselves out there, that gets to change. When we're coming into our menstrual cycle, to our bleed, the body is working hard to release. It's actually asking for rest, for nourishment, for slowing down. But often this
Mm-hmm.
women are still like, they're pushing their workouts, they've got their to-do list, like a million things to do. It's go, 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 go. What if we allow ourselves to start slowing down here? And
And
then
let things go.
yeah, exactly.
Let
So
go.
this is a beautiful time. We call it the inner winter if we look at the seasons. This is a beautiful time for releasing, for
Mm-hmm.
releasing what no longer serves you. That's what your body is doing. It's
Mm-hmm.
releasing, shedding the lining of the uterus, and it's releasing. So actually, if we look at the inner work, it's a period for release. It's
Mm-hmm.
also often where our insecurity, the back end of the luteal phase, or the inner fall, the few days before our cycle, when often PMS will show up, and then into the bleed, it's often when insecurities come up. And I say insecurities and shadows. When we start to look at, there's a pattern there. So for me, what always used to come up was imposter syndrome, that I'm not good enough, I don't know enough. And it's like, there's a pattern here. This is telling me a shadow part of myself, a part that I have not healed, met, integrated. So we can get so much wisdom through our cycle. We actually, when we're connected to our body and connected to our cycle, this is like it's like the wise woman time. This is when intuitively we're very switched on. We can get our
Mm-hmm.
download clarity coming through, and then we move into the inner spring follicular phase, which is where I've just moved into now. And it's like, oh, my energy's picking up. My yoga practice this morning was more powerful, more flowing, a little bit more strength in there than it had been while I was on my cycle. My energy's picking up, my workouts can start to pick up. The foods that I eat will slightly change. I start to feel more outgoing, more social. So I'm more likely to want to connect with people and go out rather than be in my cave, which is what happens when we're on our menstrual cycle. We can look at work, and it's like, okay, this is the time that I want to be. I can put myself out there, I can show up, I can connect more with clients and with other women. And we can even look at this with mums. It's like, maybe these are times when, maybe in your menstrual cycle, this is when the kids are at home and it's like movie time. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then as your energy's picking up, this is when you're going to get out and do things and, have more fun. So you can actually work around it. And there's obviously, I'm not going to spend too much time, but we've got the 4 phases, because we could do a whole podcast just on
Mm-hmm.
the thinking. And I actually had a friend, and we were chatting, she had quite a lot of mum guilt. And she was like, when I like, I get PMS and I'm just so cranky, and she's like, I snap at the kids and I feel so guilty. And I was like, well, why don't you just start talking to them? Why don't you just educate them about, obviously she's got twin girls and a boy, start letting them know about, mummy's cycle and the woman's body. And they start to understand that, okay, at this time of the month, mummy's a little bit like, maybe we get to, not be so chaotic and, pushing all of her buttons. We get to, understand how she's feeling. And it's like that communication and education of the kids started to do that. And it was like, wow, that made such a difference. And it
Yeah.
takes away guilt.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Going back just a little bit, when you feel stuck in your emotions, when you're feeling anger or frustration come up and you're not sure how to let that through, you're stopping yourself from feeling it. A lot of that is been impressed on us as a society that those emotions, anger and frustration and sadness, are not acceptable.
Especially for women.
Especially for women.
Yeah.
And as a society, we are told to stuff it down, stuff it down, stuff it down. Don't say anything because that's rude.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful. It's a load of bull.
Mm-hmm.
And so taking your time and becoming aware and learning how to identify those emotions, because we've been pressing them down from the time we were children, when your parents may have said something to the effect of, well, it's not worth crying over, or suck it up. It's, those type of statements, and it's not helpful.
And I think there's a big piece in us giving ourselves permission to feel and express. And it's really interesting when you say like frustration. So when frustration comes up for me, that's my cue of I am out of alignment with my higher self, and there is something deeper. There's a deeper emotion that the frustration is bring up. Now that might be anger, that might be sadness. Then if we look at something like anger, and again, we've been very much conditioned and taught not that anger is a bad emotion, it's a negative emotion, and especially it's something that women don't get angry. Now, all emotions are safe, all emotions are welcome. It's the expression is what we want to look at. So actually, often when people think about anger, what they're thinking about is aggression. Yeah. So anger is unhealthily expressed, be that shouting or projecting onto someone else, or even in extreme cases, maybe like violence, or, it's actually aggression. Anger, there's really healthy ways to work with and to express anger. That can be if someone else is involved in communicating, having conscious conversation of this is how I feel without projecting. This is how I feel, and I feel angry because. Now, we don't always have that opportunity to do that, and not everyone can receive. So there's other things, like for me personally, a really good thing has been making some noise. Now that is a cushion, screaming into it. If I'm in a space, it's rare that I'm in a space where I feel comfortable to just start screaming out loud, because often there's there's people around. So I find that grabbing a cushion and actually just like screaming, roaring, making some noise into it's moving that energy out of my body. Now that doesn't always feel safe for everyone.
No.
So for example, especially for example, if you grew up in a childhood where there was a lot of anger and expression and voices raised, and shouting, that may not feel safe.
Anger is triggering.
Yeah, so we start to look at other practices. This can be having, then maybe you need to express your anger, but there isn't the other person to do that. So who do you feel safe enough that you can sit, like how that other person can play a role? They can sit opposite or next to you, and they can hold space for you as you just let that anger come through, as you put your voice to it. Another practice I've done quite a few times with clients, and I've done it myself. I was talking to a friend about this the other day, and she's like, I remember you doing that with me, is writing a letter. Like what we're angry about. Now that could be, if it could be like whole world things, or it could be towards a specific person. So I've done this with actually abusive relationships.
I've done this as well.
And then what I find really powerful is putting our voice to it. So what I've often done with clients is I've invited them, if they feel safe to, no pressure, to send me a voice note where they just read, they put their voice to that letter. And all I am here to do is hold space, say well done, not to comment on any of it, just to be that space for them to use their voice and express it. Then I normally say burn the letter afterwards. So that's another way. And also when we do that, and I always say, like, I don't need to think about like what you're saying, as in someone else is going to hear this. Anything that's on your mind, whether you're swearing,
just get it out.
Whether you're, whatever it is. And this is the conversation I had with one of my best friend Johanna the other day. She's like, I remember when you did that about, an abusive relationship. And she was like, your language. And it was like, it just needed to come out. And held space for that. So there's these different practices that we can use with emotions, but it's very important that whatever we're doing is we feel safe to do that. Like I said, I never thought I'd be screaming and roaring and doing all of that. I've built that safety in my body for me to be able to feel safe enough to do that. However, I've worked with women that don't, and actually, like a friend I was just mentioning as well, we have lots of these conversations because we come at different angles. For her, she feels really unsafe. She can't do that. That's very triggering. So this is where we look at the different practices to move through that. We also, when we're doing a practice with emotions and we're looking at so let's say lower vibration, because there's no positive and negative, shame, fear, guilt, anger, rage. What we don't want to do is stay in that. So I love movement and somatic. So often if we're doing an exercise that's maybe meeting fear and working with fear, can we then come into something high vibration? When you've done a big or a release, or you've gone into a more difficult emotion, can that be a piece of music that comes on and you just dance, something that makes you feel good? Because we don't want to go into something and feel stuck or stay in it.
Yeah, I tell my clients to give yourself permission to feel those negative, quote unquote, emotions, but don't sit down and have a cup of tea or coffee or your favorite beverage, whatever it might be. Feel it, acknowledge it, and move through it.
Yeah, and that's it. Like, we don't have to hold on to them or stay in them for a long time. And often as well, like I really is like check in with the body. So for me, again, it's reconnecting, coming back into the body. Emotions and feelings, and they're in our body. The sensation, feeling that goes with an emotion. So like for me, when fear comes up, it's in my stomach. It's like this heaviness that I feel in my stomach. So it's sitting with, I often say close your eyes and breathe. Firstly, how does my breathing feel? Often it's going to be the shallow breath. It's going to be the shallow. Okay, I can start. What else do I feel in my stomach? Oh, my stomach. It's like this heaviness in my stomach, this knot in my stomach. Okay, what is this emotion here to tell me, to teach me? And then can I just start to breathe deeper? Can I use my breath? And can I just let that emotion move through me? Do I need to get up and move? Do I need to get up on, like on all fours and just like move the body so it moves through you? Sometimes it's journaling as well, say maybe not sitting down and staying in it, but it might be like, what do I feel in my body? Like journaling about that emotion. I often, at the beginning of this journey, is give them a practice to begin with every day, where they do a journaling practice of what were my thoughts today? What emotions arose for me? What did I feel in my body? What were the sensations? So we really start to connect. But often that's a practice that people do like at the beginning or the end of the day. It's not necessarily when they're deep in that emotion.
Yeah. Taking the small steps to allow yourself to feel safe and reconnect and awaken those parts of yourself that you hid away, and allowing your body, kind of tricking your brain into changing its ways, because it's like an old man, it gets stuck in its ways and it doesn't want to change, and you have to trick it.
And it's going, what do I need? And it's so often as well, to be able to move through and feel emotion. What do I need to ground? So what helps me feel grounded, present, and safe? Is that sitting on my yoga mat? Is that holding a crystal? Is that with my, pets? People find safety in their animals. Is that curling up with a dog? I love to with clients is find a safe space in your body. Like for me, my safe space is my heart. When I put my hand on my heart and I connect to my heart, it starts to bring it helps me to feel safe. So it's finding these little things, often as well, it's, do you need to, if you're feeling emotionally dysregulated, do you maybe need to get out and go for a walk in nature to ground? Sometimes staying in the environment is difficult to regulate. So it's, all of these things that we're sharing and suggesting, it's not that you need to go and do them all. I mean, I
No.
invite you to try them, but it's see what works for you. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, like we see often, it's like this, we're told we need to do that, like sit and meditate. Well, one thing might work for someone, but it may
And
not
it's
work
not
for
going to work for somebody
yeah,
else.
it's finding. I love to say we have like a toolbox
Mm-hmm.
practices and modalities and techniques, and you have that toolbox, and then you see which ones work for you, and then you create your own little toolbox that you get
Mm-hmm.
to go into depending on what's coming up for you on different days.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Yeah.
again, we don't have to. This is another thing in the healing office, like, oh well, I need to get up at this time, I need to meditate at this time, I need to move my body at this time, I need to eat at this, I need to do this at this time, I
Yeah.
need to make minutes, I need to journal. It's like, or if you just got this toolbox, and this is where we really drop into the feminine of what does my body want to do today? What's going to make me feel good, or what's going to help me regulate, or what's going to help me come home to
Mm-hmm.
my body? Oh, it might be some EFT tapping, it might be some yoga and movement, it might just be going out for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
What is connecting with my breath? And you get to pick and choose, and then you
Yeah.
create ultimately your own healing program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, what works for you may not work for me. For me, when life gets really too much and I just need to take a breather, I head straight for the ocean. The
Mm-hmm.
smell of the salt, the sound of the waves, the rocks on my feet, the colors of the rocks, like it's it's calming in so many different ways.
Yeah.
So just because that works for me does not mean it's going to work for everybody. Because if you are from an inland area and you're not a fan of the ocean, maybe the sound of waves drives you up the wall.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to create the same effect in for your nervous system that it does for mine.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
that's okay.
And this is it's understanding that because we've all been through different things. Some people like really going out to the ocean. So even for example, having a bath, for some
Mm-hmm.
people that can be like deeply relaxing, deeply regulating. For someone else that cannot switch off and sit still, having a bath is not going to be relaxing for them. They maybe need to do something that's active. So that could be going for a walk.
Mm.
And I love that piece about the ocean where it's connecting to our senses, because that brings us back. That's a really good tool. Brings you back into when we're dysregulated. We've almost like we're not in our body. We're in our head.
Mm-hmm.
We aren't feeling safe. We're disconnected from this present moment. We're probably either stuck in the past with something that's happened to us, or we're worrying about the future. We're
Mm-hmm.
projecting into the future. So okay, what can I see? What can I hear? What can I smell? What can I taste? What can I feel?
Mm-hmm.
Like you said, it's like feet on the ground, the sand on your feet, the smell of the ocean, the sound of the winds and the wind and the waves,
Mm-hmm.
the taste of like the salt in the air, or
Mm-hmm.
that's a really beautiful practice. It's a very common practice for anxiety, because it brings us back to the now, and
Mm-hmm.
we find safety and regulation in the now.
Mm-hmm. Wow, what a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining me today, Victoria. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Friends, if you liked what you heard, you can click the subscribe button, the like button, share the episode with your friends, and you can connect with Victoria on her website. I will include a link in the show description. And she is also on Instagram at I am Victoria Clegg, and I will include that link as well. Thank you so
Amazing.
much.
I'll just correct then, and everyone mixes this up. So I am Victoria Craig. My surname is spelt like the boy's name, like
Yes.
Caig, but often it sounds like Craig or Craig. So, but yeah, I'd love to connect. My DMs are always open, and just thank you so much for having me. It's been really really beautiful to be able to have this such a deep conversation and be able to share share together and color. I think it's such an important thing for us, is to be able to share what we have, what has helped us, and make that impact to help other women to heal and grow and reclaim their power and come home to themselves. So thank you for your wisdom and your gifts and your magic.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Friends, we will see you again next week.
Bye.